Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Johnny Martinez, and I am the head of partnerships here at CrowdComms. A very warm welcome to our spotlight session. Today, we're diving into a hot topic: how to prepare for the European Accessibility Act, something that's at top of mind for many people in our industry. I'm thrilled to introduce our moderator for today's session, the brilliant Vanessa Lovett. Vanessa brings over 20 years of experience, and just like me, she wears many hats in her professional life. She is the founder of Event Tech World, a thriving community for event tech users and buyers. She also runs her own consultancy work in the event space and serves as a strategy consultant at the Financial Times. We are in excellent hands today. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Johnny. And I am really pleased to be the moderator today because although I work in event strategy and tech, and I'm super passionate about making the event sector more accessible and inclusive, I have learned so much during the preparation for this session. And so I feel quite confident that I won't be the only person who learns as a result of this webinar taking place. Because we all know that accessibility is no longer a nice to have. It's actually really now a must have, because next week, I really mean that, we have the European Accessibility Act coming into force. So this is a digital accessibility requirement that is going to be, again, I'm going to reiterate next week, don't want to scare anybody, but it's much sooner than perhaps even I had realised. This is becoming a legal obligation for many of us to start to adhere to. But beyond that is also just the right thing to do. So events are for everyone. Events are about people, and people are diverse. And that's why today's conversation is just so important. Now, we're going to have a conversation around what is actually going on right now with the Accessibility Act, but we've also got some quite practical tools and tips and takeaways for you to have. And I am now going to introduce our two other panelists for today. So first up, I am absolutely delighted to introduce Will Custard. Will is one of the team leading the accessibility charge at CrowdComms, where they've been spearheading a major stream of work to improve digital access across the platform, something I wholeheartedly support and am absolutely delighted to hear. So everything from screen reader compatibility to keyboard navigation, event design features, you name it, Will is able to bring a really hands-on knowledge. He has some personal interest in the accessibility space too, and I think just really great passion behind this initiative too. So Will, we quite literally wouldn't be here without you and the CrowdComms team.
Hello.
And then also we have the wonderful Paul Cook, who had working with Paul on this has had given me a little trip down memory lane, because we first collaborated together about 5 years ago on some other content for the event sector. Now, Paul is a really long time champion of accessibility in the events world, and he's really well known for just pushing the industry forward with his insights and, well, if I may say so, with empathy as well. I think that's a word that I would definitely associate with you. Now you've got some knowledge that you're going to share with us on what the headlines of the regulatory landscape is looking like right now. You understand what the attendee experience perhaps could and should be, but also it's been so great preparing for this, hearing your thoughts on how there are so many different types of accessibility, but as an event sector, we need to look at this really holistically to make real change happen. So, Paul, thank you for being here. And is there anything I've missed about, and you have so many hats as well that you wear in this industry, anything else I've missed there on your reason for being here?
Well, I think that's a very kind introduction, so thank you for that. But no, I do wear various hats, and I think part of the beauty of that is being able to look at the different sides, from being on a planner side, supplier side, to really think about how the industry as a whole can benefit from learning more about accessibility and what we mean by that, and how that can make events even better. Because
Yeah.
we're always striving as an industry to complete, to go with the attendee engagement, to get the strong ROI, all of those kind of good things. But I think now is the time to again step up. And we've been stepping up for a while, but it's never going to change. There's always going to be something new that comes along. And so in some ways, I welcome this act because I think it's good and it's well needed.
Really drives change, doesn't it? It's definitely unavoidable now. So let's start then. Let's talk about what does accessibility mean now in 2025, and let's think beyond wheelchair ramps. That's perhaps the first thing that might spring to mind for many event organisers initially, but let's talk about the other things, the things that perhaps go from making an event physically accessible to also being accessible for anybody who may have neurodiversity, for anybody who also may have any sort of condition that means digital access can be more challenging. Paul, I'm going to ask you to kick us off here. What does accessibility mean now in 2025?
Well, Vanessa, I want to make it really simple. I want to just give you two words, no barriers. That's basically what accessibility is all about. It's so that anybody of any ability, with anything, can be open to enjoying an event or using tech, and they use it in a way that's simple for them. Now, I was just in a production a couple of weeks ago, and the director of the production had some site issues, and I would hear that on the tech that he had, there would be a little voice that would say, "Okay, this says this, and this," and he was able to still, communicate. So it's all about taking away any barriers to participation. It's about ease of environments, whether that's a physical environment or a tech environment, so that anybody, any ability, doesn't matter, they can still enjoy that. And I think your example of the wheelchair is really well known because it's kind of an easy one. We can see it, we understand people in wheelchairs, right? Okay, um, that is a condition. But like you say, so many people have disabilities of some form. And in fact, the World Health Organization estimates it's kind of like 1 in 6 people at some point have either a disability or maybe a difficulty in learning. And that's a huge stat. And it's not as though everybody is born with conditions. 80%, according to Disability Sport UK, say that they're acquired during a lifetime. So all of us might be able to be physically able right now, but who knows what's around the corner. So I think it's really important that we get underneath making sure that all of our events are lovely, that people come back time and again, and we do think of these different abilities. But more than that, I think it's about really thinking about the overall experience for everyone,
And
regardless of
Will,
condition or
you
that.
also shared a really interesting some evidence that in the female population that sometimes this is woefully under diagnosed as well, when this industry can in certain parts of it be very, very female heavy. So could you just share a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so in terms of like the male diagnosis, we're looking at about sort of 15%, certainly when you talk about neurodiversities and things like that. And I think I heard the statistic the other day is actually in Chris Packham's documentary, which I actually implore people to go and watch if they want to find out a little bit more and understand a little bit more about neurodiversities. It's so underdiagnosed that actually they've skewed the statistics. So it's something like I think it's about 3%, I think was the actual figure. And having literally my wife's just gone through this. So in the last couple of years, luckily at work, she was able to kind of get a company, an occupational health company, to come in, and they diagnosed her with a few different labels. That's based off the fact that my a couple of my children have it, and actually it's quite often genetic. So it's somewhere in the family if your children probably have it. But, in terms of the commodity that we all trade in events is engagement. And if you are just completely, isolating a certain, percentage of your audience, then that's going to affect how successful your event is. So you really need to pay attention to everything you can.
So at a headline level, and I'll ask each of you to share just a quick thought on this, how should organisers just start to think about, or rethink, I'll say, rethink about accessibility in their design of their events so that they are starting to take this holistic approach of thinking about the physical accessibility aspects, the neural accessibility, and the digital too? What should they do? Any thoughts? Paul, I'll ask you to start there.
That is such a good question. And yeah, I think logistically, so if we deal with the start of the event, are you going to have it in one location? I mean, that sounds fairly obvious, but if you are having your guests in a hotel and they've got a meeting room and you're using everything in there and they've got some breakout rooms, that's great. You can get really clear on how you can interact with that venue and how you can work together, because this is all about working together. One of the issue can be you decide we're going to have the plenary and some breakouts here, but we want to take people off site. We want to take an awards dinner somewhere else. We want to go out. We want to do some learning activities by walking around the local town or whatever it happens to be. So for each step that you're going to do, it's really a case of thinking through, all right, so what does this mean in terms of people coming in and being easily able to get around? And that goes to things like signage, navigation, simple things, but things that are so important. And also letting people know. One of the big things is to always explain to people what's going on, where things are, how, where the rooms are, what the sessions are, what they're going to be doing. So the first piece is the physical location. And it may be that you decide, actually, this is really easy to get to because there's an airport or a train station close by, and you might think that's great. But then you've got to think about, well, how are people coming and what is that going to be like when they actually get here? So whilst it may not be your responsibility as a planner in terms of, okay, I need to sort out the venue and the other sites we're going to, if you are not considering at a strategic level whether or not you can get people physically into that venue without too much aggravation, then you're missing an opportunity. And one of the easiest things as well for people to do is think about having recordings, maybe have some streaming for people that will never come to your event because it's in person and they're not able or they don't want to come, but they still want to enjoy. So maybe in this whole discussion around accessibility, we need to think of the other formats in which we look at events. And yeah, so I'd start with those. I mean, it's a huge question you've just asked.
It is a big question, you're right.
I think you have to take yourself out of your own head, because otherwise you're producing an event that you might like. You might say, yeah, all of these people will like these things, but we have to really take a different approach to that. And I would start working with consultants that have got lived experience of these things as well, because then that means that you are getting a totally different you're getting a perspective that is invaluable. I don't believe that you can put somebody in a wheelchair and just say, okay, experience it, this is how you do it. Everybody's got different things going on the whole time, and I think you need to get into deaf and blindness and maybe other societies or charities that are really got this information and really talk to them about maybe there's a way that they can help you, you can help them. So I think to reach out right now and start looking at people that have got this lived experience embedded. And there are multiple societies around that could help with that, and then get them on board rather than say, okay, yep, we're all good. They just need this. And that's a terrible term to use as well. Never ever refer to people as a group. It's very triggering.
I think some very, very good advice there. I am going to come to Will in just a moment for a digital angle on this, because that's where you have been spending a huge amount of energy and effort to drive improvement. And just before I do that, I will reference the chat, which is alive with people saying hello and where they are joining from, which is great. Joe from sunny Cardiff, hello, and Ed, hello, Poppy, hello. This is great. Please use the Q&A as well, because we definitely will have time for some questions at the end. And we really want to hear what the questions you have are, because we're all learning on a journey here. And sometimes your question might feel like something you don't want to ask, but there's every chance as we are on this learning journey together that someone else got exactly the same question. So please use the Q&A. It's on the right-hand side of your screen, and keep using the chat as well to comment on what we're saying, because it helps us to know what your perception is of what we're saying. So Will, coming back to you now, digitally, just for getting started with approaching accessibility from the digital standpoint, what would be a couple of suggestions that you'd give to organisers?
So I would always start with talking to your platform provider. So, if you can't have that conversation, then, you need to find a way to have it to kind of access what their accessibility credentials are. Ideally, they've been accredited by a third party. They adhere to the WCAG guidelines, either the previous ones, 2.1 or 2.2, to at least the AA standard.
I'm going to interrupt you briefly, Will. WCAG,
Oh,
I
yes.
know what it is, but please can you explain that for our viewers in case there's anyone who's not so familiar with it?
Yes, so that is the World Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that is basically the where we get all of our guidelines from, to the standards we should be working to. So they do have a website. We were speaking earlier, weren't we, about actually it's quite difficult to decipher some of that information. There are different, if you give it a Google, there are different companies, different articles that have broken it down a little bit, but essentially, so if I just we work with under four pillars, if you like. So perceivability, that's things like alt tags and adaptable content. So making sure that your platform is responsive. Operability, which is making sure that people can navigate through that website with their keyboard. Understandability, which is the actual design of the pages, if you like. So clear instructions, readable content. And I'll show you a few examples of these things in a second. And then robustness, so making sure that the code has ARIA labels. So that ARIA labels are within the code, which, let's say you've got a button which is an icon. So actually in our stream that you're watching right now, you'll see that there's a little arrow in the corner to submit your chat message. That will have an ARIA label on, so a screen reader can say, this is the submit button for your chat message, for example. So that's embedded in the code. So we work to those standards throughout what we do, as well as giving tools on the front end through the CMS to organisers to do their bit. So
Okay.
Robustness is the assistive technologies that people use. So they might have different colored screens, they might have different size text, they might have screen readers, they might have all sorts of different technology on their machines.
So just a tiny surface line bit of advice there, which was talk to your suppliers directly about this. And I will add to that, if they say anything that you don't fully understand, ask them to explain it again and again and again. And I really can't emphasize enough, I have worked in tech supply side as well. Tech suppliers love it when you ask them for these details. So please go for it as to the best of your abilities. And there was reference to a website there. Will just said, perhaps we could either pop that website link in the chat or include it in the post-event report for this. That would be absolutely fabulous as well. So I'm going to come back to Paul now. We've talked really high level about accessibility from both talked about physical, neural, and just touched on digital as well. But can we actually just talk about the European Accessibility Act? Again, headline level, but can you give us a quick overview of what this actually means, Paul, and what it maybe doesn't mean as well? And maybe if you could also add in the US situation as well that we briefly discussed during prep, I think that would be probably quite enlightening.
Very good. Yeah, of course. And so key dates, 28th of June 2025 is when this becomes law. It's been going for the last 6 years. They've been talking about how it gets adopted. Now, a lot of the accessibility laws on data, they are already being transferred across from the individual country into the EU Accessibility Act. And the reason they're doing this, Vanessa, is quite simply because the different countries, the different member states all had different levels of requirements. So this is to streamline, to harmonize, so that any individual that was in the European Union would be able to access any of the tech easily. And that's really the big thinking behind it. Now, whilst we talk about digital products, which is what it is, digital goods and services, that's great. But don't forget as well that we need to factor in a little bit just on the physical side, so that if you've got screens that you want people to be able to use, they've got to be appropriate so that person can use them if they are sitting down or if they're not able to get around so much. But digital, you're dead right. The key areas, websites, mobile apps, they've got to comply with these web content accessibility guidelines, which Will just mentioned. So if you want a start point, look them up, go on Google, they're easily found, and then you will see that you can go through various levels of conformance, which we'll step on to in a minute. Any ATMs, ticket machines, they've got to be accessible, ebooks, e-readers, they've got to have assistive technologies such as screen readers. E-commerce platforms, well, that's wide open. So, and I think that's quite on purpose as well, because they're not trying to say it's just this or just that. If they use a term like e-commerce, then that means all the retailers as well that are involved in sales of any particular product. Banking services, public transport, and telecoms, they've all got to be accessible as well. Now, what does this mean for an event planner? It means things like registrations, your tickets, how you buy those, what you're doing at badging, all of these kind of things would fall under this. And you might be thinking, well, look, I'm just a UK planner or I'm a states planner. It doesn't matter to me. It absolutely does. So that's a key issue. It doesn't matter where your organization is based. It doesn't have to be in the European Union. If you are outside and you are hosting or providing a service or a good into the European Union after the 28th of June, you must comply with these key requirements. And you might think, well, okay, how do I know what I need to do? Well, the web content guidelines are good to go to. And then also have a look at the individual country. So if you're holding an event in Spain, have a look, just see what they say. Now they will follow the broad pattern, but this is not the same as GDPR, where it was really crystal clear that there was a certain amount of fine if you got it wrong, and that was across the board. Everybody understood. What we have now is the member states are able to put their own levels of fine and penalty up. And if in Ireland, they've taken that a stage further, where you can actually go to prison if you don't quite get this right. Now, it's not to scare anybody, but that's just to draw attention to the fact that some countries are seeing it different to others. But the two things are, one is the legislation comes down from the European Union, hence the Act. But the guidelines that they're all working towards are these web content accessibility guidelines. So my strongest advice today is, if you are not familiar with that term, you've never come across it before, now is the time. And I'd say as well, don't take this on yourself. work with your tech suppliers, work with the venues, find out what's going on at each of these stages, because this is something that needs to be embroidered across a piece, because otherwise it's not going to work. And you know, it could easily be that venues could fall short of not doing the right thing. So
there's loads of questions coming through in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A section, which is excellent. Please keep them coming, as we will come to them towards the end of the session. Main summaries from that, though, Paul, are if you're not in the EU, this is still very real for you if you're running events within the EU.
Yeah.
So be alive to it and start to, if you haven't already started, start to become familiar with what this could and should mean for the way you're approaching your accessibility for your events in a digital capacity specifically, which may be new for some on the phone call, sorry, on the webinar, maybe old news, and maybe some folks are already really heavily involved in making progress here. And you talked a little bit there about some of the consequences of non-compliance. Amazing to hear that in Ireland it could be prison. And as you said, you don't want to scare anybody, but we need to take this seriously, I think, is the message I take from that. This is not to be ignored.
Well, I think the other thing to that is, whilst we got fines, we got legal penalties, we got all sorts of things that we need to be doing to adhere to this. That's great. But actually, if you flip it, if you embrace it, if you embrace the idea of actually we need everything to be accessible because that's going to help us, well, that's going to drive your brand reputation, and it's also going to drive sales and other things. And I strongly suggest as well that when, you know, from anybody in sales all the way through to ops and marketing, everybody understands this, then business is going to grow. The companies, the organizations that are going to miss out are going to be those that kind of, well, we're not going to prioritize that because it's another thing to do. It isn't. This is now something that has to be embedded if you want to move forward, because legislation around the world is going to carry on. We've all got it, and we've already got it in the UK. There's the UK Equality Act 2010. Over in America, they've got the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is nothing kind of new. There's been legislation around for a while, but if it acts as a catalyst and it can bring you benefits to get to people that wouldn't be able to come to you and use your products and services, that's got to be a good thing, surely. Because the spending power of a group of people, you know, of a community that isn't able to come to your events is huge, huge.
And I think this is probably the perfect moment to segue into, how do you do this digitally then? I can see there's some questions coming through about what does best practice look like from a registration perspective, for example, and how does this change the way we're doing things? So Will, I'm definitely coming over to you now, and I think we should see some of this in action too, because my understanding is this is around screen reader compatibility, it's around text size, colors, it's around explainers, access, whether it's virtual or hybrid. And talk us through it. What have you been doing? How are you making the digital aspect of events more accessible?
Yeah, so let's show you some things. So I'm going to share what we've been up to. A lot of this has existed for quite a while, but there's a couple of new features that we'd like to take you through. So I'm going to jump into our page designer. So a lot of our tools, whether it's event app or registration or kiosk, badge designer or kiosk designer, use our tool of the kind of drag and drop builders, right? So this is a registration page, quite a simple page. I've got my agenda, I've got everything here.
Maybe go a tiny bit slower when you're scrolling, if you can, Will.
Oh, yes, we got a little bit.
You're very familiar with it. For us,
yes.
This is educational.
I will slow down a little bit. So we have tools where obviously you can design the page to be as accessible as possible. So that is, you know, adjusting spacing, making sure content is readable, making sure all the text sizes are accessible, making sure your color palette is right, making sure your images have alt tags. So for example, if I jump into my promo here that I've got, and I am going to add an image to here, I'll just grab any old image for a second. You'll see that what we, first of all, we've got a size warning, because obviously that's going to be important when people are loading things on mobile screens. And we've also got an added description to your image box. So this is your alt tag, essentially. So this is going to describe what the image is. Now, you can skip this, but we would encourage you to always add your alt tags to images, because it just, obviously, it makes everything more accessible. I will just stop that for a moment and just jump out of this and come back into it, because I don't want that huge image on my screen. The other thing that's really important, obviously, and this is out of the box anyway, so you guys don't need to worry about this, is all of our content is obviously completely responsive. So when you're talking about the WCAG guidelines being for websites and mobile apps and mobile websites, what you get, what our platform gives you is literally, it's the same code base throughout the different experiences. So whether, if you are running an on-site event and you're an event app customer and you need to pivot, or you think actually this is not very accessible, we think actually we've got some of our audience that would like to see this online rather than visit in person, because they might have some issues that they don't want to kind of come to the event, then you can switch and pivot quite quickly to a hybrid event. Or if you're virtual, you can obviously go on any device that you like. And all of this is built with screen readers in mind, with that robustness that I talked about for assistive technologies.
Will, can I ask you to explain for the viewers code base, please?
Yes, sorry. So that is what we build. So that's what we're responsible for. So we take, everything we build as a development team in this platform, we hold ourselves to certain standards. So we make sure that we've got those ARIA labels. We make sure that we've got alt tags ourselves for anything that we put in as an image. We make sure that we are coding and testing to the right levels to adhere to the WCAG guidelines, 2.2. So that's our job as the platform provider. And that's the conversation that you really need to have with your provider is, do you adhere, is the code that sits behind my event app, my event site, is that accessible? First and foremost, yes. Okay, now what tools do you have to help me, the event organizer, make my event as accessible as possible? Because as the platform provider, we can lead you to water, we can make sure we're doing all of the right things, but it's up to you what your color palette is, what your spacing is, what your text size is, how accessible your design is of your application. So that is making sure you've got all your alt tags. And another tool which I'll just show you a second is if I go into my branding section of ours and we go into the color scheme, you'll see that my branding colors, my content colors, my background colors, I've got a little tooltip here at the top that tells me, okay, great news. This color palette here for my content, I'm AAA accessible. Same with my background colors. I'm doing well on that front. My contrast between my accent and text on accent is not so great. So these labels here are accent color and text on accent. So if I actually change that now to be a darker green, then you can see I've gone up to a AA accessible.
Right.
So that is a good way to just check that your color palettes are as good as possible. AA is okay. AA is fine. AA is okay. If you really, really want to be absolutely perfect, you can go for AAA. So if I actually went like really dark now, if I chose a black, for example, so there we go, and now I'm AAA accessible. Now there is also, you've got to have a little bit of creative freedom. You've got to have, I'm sure everyone's got brand colors, everyone's got things to adhere to, but this is a great little tool to make sure that you're accessible, your content's accessible. Now there's plenty more, but I think probably those are the key areas that you need to focus on. We do a lot. Make sure that your alt tags are ready, make sure that your design is accessible, and make sure that your color palette's right.
Okay, great. And How would you potentially recommend that organisers then test this, what they create in the platform? So as you say, you can lead the horses to the water, but how can they then make sure that they are drinking in the right way? Do they go to their audience and ask them? Do they, I guess Paul suggested earlier on, build a relationship perhaps with some of the organisations across the UK and go and ask them to test what they've created?
I mean, you can definitely do that. I would also, as a UX designer of 20 years who's done a lot of usability testing and qualitative research, I would, you can always go down that route. You can always ask people. You can get advocates within your organization. You can get third-party accreditations. You can do all sorts. You can also, just a quick, if you put the link to your event app into this Google Lighthouse or the WCAG itself, you can just run it through and it will give you a score. It will give you that AAA, AA, or it's not really quite good enough at the moment. So there are online tools that you can use just with a simple link that you can just pop it into and just make sure it's as accessible as possible.
And again, I'm sure those links can be added to the post-webinar follow-up information. And if you do get the not quite good enough yet, which I think is going to be inevitable. So first, I say, don't beat yourself up if you get that. We're all going to fall on the wrong side of where we want to be from time to time here. But the right things to think about are those three areas that you listed then to get you started on the next stage of the journey.
Yeah, the fact is that if you're running it through any sort of accessibility checker, that means you've already got the empathy for your audience that you would like it to be accessible. So you've gone some distance to actually making sure that you can. Now, look, nobody's perfect. We're not perfect. We would like to do more. We still have streams of work planned in to make it even better, even more accessible, making sure that we are accredited by all the right third parties, making sure that we can provide that to our customers when they need it, when they're coming, their compliance, their organizations and things like that. But absolutely, as long as you are thinking about it, that's a really good step in the right direction.
Completely agree. And we absolutely must give ourselves permission to start from somewhere. And if somewhere is right, and I think we have to be a little bit, have some empathy for ourselves with this.
Totally. I mean, we need to, you learn from failure, as you mentioned earlier. It's, you've got to be allowed to fail. That's why we've got the tools in place to, well, not to tell you you're failing, but to help you do a bit better.
Yeah. I think this is a good time to start to bring in some questions from the audience because there are quite a few coming through. They're on my second screen. I'm still paying full attention, but that's why I'm looking at to the side. So top of the list, and Paul, I'm going to ask you to field this one, which is if I use a third-party platform, and it could also, I imagine, be some sort of third-party contractor, perhaps using a different platform as well. Am I still responsible for the compliance?
I think you absolutely are. Yeah. Because you are, you're choosing to use that particular tool as part of the thing. So in the same way that you select speakers, you select your audio visual kit, it's no different. I don't think you would be able to say, well, actually, we got this and it didn't work. It's just a contracting agreement. What you can do is you can ask on all of these things for their VPAT compliance, which is a voluntary product accessibility template, not to get anybody in knots with the terminology, but that has to outline from that technology provider how that product meets accessibility standards in conjunction with these web content accessibility guidelines. So that's one thing that should, if you've got a provider that can't give that, that should send off a little alarm bell. So if they say it is, okay, that's one thing. If you get people offering you quick fixes, they're probably not so good either. Things like little overlays where you're just kind of putting a plaster on something. You really need to get to the bottom of what's going on. But I think the key that I would say on this is that just going back to your point about we're all learning where, it is evolving. It's going to continue to evolve. there have been different versions of these guidelines. So the thing is that now that you know about the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, have a look for the latest version, because that's normally going to be the one that you work to. And we are currently on 2.2, which is the one that we'll refer to. They are working on a draft of 3.0, and we've gone from 1. So you can see it's evolving. It's like, I always think of it like updates on your mobile phone. You know, you're always going to get that. There's always going to be something new coming along. But what I just want to mention in there is that whilst you've got these different versions, there are different levels of conformance. So A is kind of like the minimum. You can get by with A, but it's not the one really that most people go for and understand. And the one that Will talked about, the double A, is the one where most companies are going because they know that's more robust. You mentioned the triple A, and that is up another level of things that you have to do. There's another 28 additional criteria to the double A.
Wow.
And one of those things is that you have to have sign language translation for pre-recorded video content. So if you think of what that might entail, sometimes you may not want to go for that AAA thing. So have a look through, get familiar. And again, all of this is on the websites. But the terminology that we're using today, the 2.2 is the most recent version. The AA is also the version, the conformance level that most companies are aspiring to. And the alt text, again, I'd back up what Will was saying. That is so important. If you've got images on that don't have any alt text, it's a fail. Now, unfortunately, the Digital Trust Index last year, they looked at digital accessibility in Europe, and of 260,000 homepages that they looked at, I just went to the homepages, and it wasn't events, it was across a whole array of different industries. 94% of them failed. They failed accessibility requirements. And it would be simple things like color contrast, alt text, having links that actually go somewhere, having buttons that are labeled. So these are all relatively easy fixes. We're not asking for a redesign of everything, but just, understand these things, and then you'll be well away. Sorry if I veered off your question. Did I veer off your question?
No, I don't. I mean,
Feel that
a
little piece
little,
in.
but all good stuff. So we welcome these detours when they are taking us in good direction. And Johnny, I think there's a lot more questions here. It'd be great to hear your thoughts on a couple of these that are coming up next. So the next question, and I think this is directed at CrowdComms specifically, which is, are more clients asking you for better accessibility, asking more accessibility questions in general?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. Whether it is, because the organizers are getting to understand requirements and needs at a deeper level, or, because people are, getting ready, to, for the legislation. Yeah, there are, I guess, a number of things, people are considering. Something that especially throughout the conversation, to understand accessibility, you have to be able to put yourself in other people's shoes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the word empathy in the beginning, and I think this is key because we all attend and understand events through our lived experiences. So what can we do to make sure that we understand the needs and requirements of people and attendees and their different conditions. So we need to ask questions. And the same way we've become so efficient at collecting dietary requirements in our registrations and our data capture forms. So why not ask, what can we do to make sure that attendees are having a better experience? What can I do to make your life easier?
And Paul mentioned earlier as well, you've sort of got to take yourself out of it a little bit to try and look at this very objectively, which isn't always something we perhaps allow ourselves time to do. If we're very honest, event professionals are busy folk, generally rushing from one project to the next, or spinning many projects at the same time. So I guess there's an element of allocating time to do this properly. And there is a really interesting question in here, which is how do you talk about accessibility with your team if budget is tight? And I think that's something that will likely resonate with a number of different individuals on the webinar. And I don't think it's necessarily always that budget is tight. Sometimes it could be that time is tight and that perhaps their bandwidth is already quite well stretched, and you add something else to the plate, and that's sometimes not always received brilliantly. Johnny, any thoughts on that before I have a thought or two, but I'm curious to hear if you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think I can understand how money is a concern, but we need to look at this as an opportunity, because it is about inclusivity at the end of the day. So of course, if we make our attendees' life experience, I mean, this translates into better revenue, and probably increased ticket sales in that sense. So it is an investment to then have a bigger return. I mean, that's how I see it. And in the era of AI today, a lot of these, when you're not sure about whether my site or my digital platform or any facility that I'm putting out there is accessible enough, then there are tools that will automate that process for you and will tell you within minutes what are the things that you need to address first, because you do need to prioritize when you're going through this process. What are the things that are more urgent, and what are the things that I can look at later on.
Yeah, I think the thought I was going to add to what you have replied there, Johnny, is if you can allocate somebody who, or a couple of people, share the responsibility, but make it part of their role. And it might only be 10% of their role, but still that's a step forward. And so that they do actually have the time to do this properly. And there is some requirement for them to do it properly. Johnny, you look like you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, assign an accessibility champion. So
just as we have done sustainability champions and other such similar sorts of initiatives. There's another question from Rebecca Gibson that I think is quite a nice segue on from this one. Would you recommend creating an accessibility statement for our members, who I assume are the folks who attend their events? So we're being transparent about our commitment to accessibility. Johnny, you're smiling, so I'm going to keep coming back to you, but I'd quite like to hear Paul's thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I think as a neurodivergent individual, or anyone that would already struggle, or you're feeling the anxiety of, I am going to attend this event, are people making reasonable adjustments for me to have a good experience? If I see already on the website that you are committed to accessibility, that you are committed to inclusivity, that you are taking the steps towards improving that experience, then of course, I think as a member, as an attendee, as a stakeholder, I would feel more confident about what you're doing, your strategy, and what you're committed to. So I would definitely recommend that.
And Paul, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a really good idea. And in some countries, it is actually a requirement that you do actually put that, you do have a statement that you are accessibility focused. And I think that if you are going to put that statement out, you just need to be sure on exactly what you are saying, so that if you've got anybody that's in your team that isn't aware, hasn't had training, doesn't fully understand what that encompasses, then you could be kind of giving yourself a bit of a problem. It's really important. And I think, as Johnny has said, the more that you've got, I look at websites, and if I see language that talks about accessibility and there are things where people can go and they can find out more information, then that is all good. And I think it applies not just for your attendees, but for anybody else that's coming in, because sometimes I feel, Vanessa, that we get a little bit fixed on the attendees, the participants that's coming, but we've
Mhm.
also got to be mindful of speakers that are coming
Here,
that may
here.
have requirements. So if you've got a speaker that may be hard, maybe there's a hearing issue, they need to be positioned. If they're on a panel, they've got to be positioned in the right way so that they can, see, maybe read the lips or whatever it happens to be. But we got to be
Mhm.
aware of that when it comes to bringing speaker presenters on stage that might be in a wheelchair. How are we going to get them up there?
Yeah.
And let's say that this goes back to checking out the physical um, abilities of a venue where we don't want people going through goods lifts. Let's please not do that. Let's not have them carried by other people. Let's just, there's a dignity around all of
Yeah.
this. I think to Johnny's point, empathy is one thing to change the way that we think about these things, but also as individuals, nobody wants to have um, everybody's concerned with their dignity because you don't want to feel like you're the person creating a problem, and
Yeah.
that can lead to other issues. So absolutely yes to an accessibility statement, but just test it, test for
Yeah.
its rigor. And the
Uh,
more that you get involved with people in terms of this is the way that we do things, this is normal, this is what we do every day. It's like you're drinking your tea or coffee at the start of the day. If we embed it in the way that we do everything, then those opportunities just become huge. And
I
Johnny
would
mentioned the kind of missing amount of money that you could be leaving on the table. If I tell you that in the UK alone, the spending power of households with one disabled person, they reckon that's 274 billion per year. And just let that sink in for a moment because that is a huge figure. So, it might help with budgeting if you're able to include other people.
I would say you should perhaps think about going a little bit further than just a statement as well. So, you know, privacy policies and statements and like just a document which is quite long and hard, potentially fairly dry to read is one thing. Why not weave it into the whole design? Why not have a section in the app which is about all of the different accessibility features that they can access, whether they're on site or digitally? Why not on the session pages have a little button that they can click to kind of find out a little bit more about how to make this experience more accessible? Actually think about designing it into everywhere, touch points throughout the application, rather than just maybe just a statement that pops up at the beginning to say, we've thought about you, don't worry. Why not actually think about designing it into what they're doing?
and ask your suppliers for help with that, right? This is
Absolutely.
something you would want to
Absolutely.
be helping with. And the last thing I'll add on the accessibility statement, because I imagine, I think it's a great question to have sent in, because I'm quite sure this is an example where you won't be the only person wondering this. That statement doesn't have to say you do everything already. It's a statement of what you can do and what your intentions are, and potentially even could work in the request for help and support in developing your accessibility journey as well. I think we have to remember it's okay to ask for guidance and for help, and there's no one better to ask than your customers, really.
Yeah.
There's another question, so I think it comes quite nicely after what Will was saying there, and we touched on it. Will, you've touched on this already, but this is from Jack Durden. From a registration and badging perspective, so I'm definitely throwing this one to Will and Johnny because I feel this is in your wheelhouse. What would best practices be to comply with the EAA? So, Will, you have touched on this, but let's just be really focused on reg and badging. What would you
Yeah.
answer?
Shall I go first?
Go on, Johnny. Yeah, you go first.
I mean, accessible forms, of course, first of all, that's the first thing. So label all form fields clearly and, use, depending on the system you use semantic HTML. Also grouped elements like radio buttons, checkboxes, makes life easier for anyone navigating, a registration form. Ensure proper tab order as well, keyboard navigation, screen reader compatibility, like Will was mentioning, visual design, the contrast, as we just said, now, because there is a ratio there that is key, and I'm sure Will can mention more about that. But then also language. Sometimes we can make, because it's fairly simple, we can make statements fairly wordy, and paragraphs can get very chunky as well, and they're very difficult to read. If you write in very long paragraphs around your sites and digital facilities, it is better to sort of break them up, break the text up as much as you can. For me, badging, one of the things I was going to mention is it is better if you have bigger fonts on the badges as well, so that they're easier to read, and also think about the fonts, fonts that are easier for the readability, simpler layouts as well, so you avoid clutter. So avoid unnecessary information if you don't need job titles, and things like things like that, or countries, if it's a fairly national event, then just keep the information to what is required. And something that I've seen as well, this is especially for blind or low vision attendees, is that you have tactile badges, or you have Braille, included in it, and it allows them to, also get to know other people, network, read the names, that way. So yeah, those are some of my recommendations.
Thank you.
I'm going to see if the stream techs are on their toes. I'm going to share my screen again in a second. But while you're getting that ready, I would say that just to add to that, we've obviously got lots of different sized kiosks. So make sure you've got a low kiosk, make sure it's accessible,
Nice.
wheelchair
For when they arrive on site.
Exactly. So some of our kiosks are very tall and they're very popular, but they can't be adjusted in height. So we do have desktop ones, we have tiny little ones that can sit really low down. So we're looking at voice search, making sure that being able to, you don't have to type your name in, you can just say who you are and it will pick who you are up, and you can say print to it and it will print your badge out rather than scanning your QR code, getting you things like that. So there is that. In terms of the forms, which I'll share my screen again. Hopefully it will come. And how you going to?
And I'm only going to give you 1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute,
because we're very close to the end.
We go a long way anyway to kind of making your forms accessible. Couple of tips. So you can design your forms to be single page, which is every question on one page. You can do it section by section, which is a bit more accessible, and you can do question by question. Now, those controls are for you to decide where to start. We have those controls for the end user as well, so they can choose whether to look at it all in one big form, section by section, or question by question. The last thing I'll say, well, two more things really quickly. You can stack that information, or you can give inline contextual information alongside questions as well. So this space here is a really good way to make sure that you are explaining, giving it a bit of context, giving a bit more help to those who might need it. There is spaces alongside the forms to give you that alongside that.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And I feel like we've covered a lot today, and there's a lot more to come. Like I said, thank you also for your questions. One of the questions you asked was, will there be more information shared? And the great news is yes, absolutely, because CrowdComms are developing a white paper in collaboration with Paul Cook to help you better understand this and include some of the actions that have been discussed. I would like to say a huge thank you to Paul, also to Will and Johnny, and to CrowdComms at large for inviting me to join you on this webinar today, because this is the first of 2 exciting collaborations between CrowdComms and Event Tech World this summer, because CrowdComms are also sponsoring Event Tech World's Insider Exchange on the 16th of July, which is a peer-led event for anyone who uses event tech in your company to get better results. So hopefully we can share a link to that at some point afterwards as well, because it's going to be an absolutely awesome day. And we were talking before this event about IBTM. I'll be speaking there, and it turns out that CrowdComms are doing something quite cool at IBM too. So I'm going to pass the mic back to Johnny to tell us what's happening at IBTM and close the webinar.
That is correct. Thank you, Vanessa. We are organizing and hosted by a group at IBTM. So IBTM will be happening in November. And for anyone interested, we will be sending a communication out after the webinar with the on-demand recording, with more information on the guidelines that we've mentioned during this webinar, also about the events coming up, the Insider Exchange, about how to sign up for that, hosted by a group. All of that will be included in there. And yes, keep an eye out for that. And thank you all for joining us today. It has been a pleasure.